Every 8 years, Venus traces a five-petaled flower across the sky. An actual geometric pattern, drawn by the planet's orbit as seen from Earth. 5 petals, 5 cycles, 8 years. The whole thing resets and begins again. But almost nobody talking about Venus retrograde on your phone has ever mentioned this, because the version that dominates social media has almost nothing to do with what the planet actually does, what ancient cultures observed, or what the oldest surviving story about Venus teaches. That story is over 4,000 years old. It was pressed into clay in ancient Sumer, and it changes everything you have been told about Venus retrograde. You have heard the advice. It circulates every 18 months when Venus appears to reverse direction in the sky. Do not get married. Do not change your appearance. Do not make major financial commitments. Old flames may reappear. You might suddenly find your partner less attractive or question a relationship you thought was solid. And above all, wait. Wait until Venus goes direct and then resume your life. This advice treats Venus retrograde as romantic disruption, as if the planet's only job is managing your love life. And when it reverses, the system glitches, your feelings get unreliable, your attractions go sideways. Your ex somehow picks up a cosmic signal and decides to text you. But Venus, in every astrological tradition that ever studied it seriously, was never just about romance. Venus governs what you value. Relationships, yes, but also money, self-worth, beauty, pleasure, the things you find meaningful, the choices you make about how to spend your time, your energy, and your resources. The question Venus poses is not, who do you love? The deeper question, the one the ancient traditions actually asked, is what do you value and why? When you reduce that question to, will my ex text me? You have taken one of the most psychologically rich transits in the astrological system and turned it into a dating column. The real story starts with what Venus actually does in the sky. And what it does is unlike anything else in the solar system. Venus orbits the Sun in 225 days. Earth orbits in 365. The ratio between those two numbers is almost exactly 13 to 8. 13 Venus orbits fit inside 8 Earth years with astonishing precision, the difference being roughly 2 days over the entire 8-year span. That near-perfect mathematical relationship means that every 8 years, Venus returns to almost the same position relative to Earth and the Sun. And during those 8 years, Venus and the Sun align from Earth's perspective exactly 5 times. Plot those 5 alignment points on a circle and connect them in order. You get a pentagram, a 5-pointed star. Plot the full orbital path Venus traces between those points as seen from Earth, and the lines curve into petals. 5 petals radiating from a central point, forming a geometric rose. This is the literal orbital path of Venus mapped from our planet's perspective. You can reproduce it with any astronomical plotting software and watch the flower appear on your screen. That 5-petaled rose has been one of the oldest and most enduring symbols in human culture, across civilizations that had no contact with one another. Roses appear in Sumerian art, Greek mythology, Roman religion, Christian iconography, Islamic geometry, and Hindu temple architecture, and the connection between Venus and the rose reaches back at least to the Sumerians. Around 2500 BCE, where the goddess Inanna, who was the planet Venus in Sumerian cosmology, was depicted with 5-pointed star symbols on cylinder seals. A seal dating to approximately that period shows Inanna with a pentagram, predating the Greek adoption of the symbol by 2,000 years. The planet drew the flower, the culture named the goddess. The symbol outlived both by millennia. The Sumerians were not alone in tracking Venus with near-obsessive precision. The Maya of Mesoamerica, separated from Mesopotamia by an ocean and several thousand years, independently developed one of the most sophisticated Venus tracking systems in the ancient world. The Dresden Codex, a Mayan manuscript dating to roughly the 13th century, but based on observations going back centuries earlier, contains Venus tables that predict the planet's appearances and disappearances with accuracy rivaling modern computation. The Maya tracked Venus's full cycle, its appearance as morning star for roughly 260 days, its disappearance for about 50 days, its reappearance as evening star for another 260 days. and its second disappearance for about 8 days during retrograde. Their calendar system interlocked Venus cycles with solar and lunar cycles into a structure that governed agriculture, warfare, and ritual. Venus was not decoration in Mayan culture. It was infrastructure. The fact that civilizations on opposite sides of the planet, with no contact between them, independently built their calendars and mythologies around the same planetary pattern tells you something about how conspicuous Venus's behavior is. You do not need a telescope to track it. You need clear skies, eyes, and patience. Venus is the third brightest object in the sky after the sun and moon. Its disappearance during retrograde is visible, dramatic, and unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Within each 18-month Venus cycle, the retrograde period lasts roughly 40 days. And during this retrograde, Venus passes between Earth and the Sun, and for approximately 8 days at the midpoint, it vanishes from view entirely. It drops below the horizon line, lost in the sun's glare, invisible from Earth. Then it reappears on the other side, transitioning from evening star to morning star. The brightest light in the night sky goes dark and then returns. The ancients did not have the orbital mechanics to explain this disappearance. What they saw was their brightest celestial light dying, and they built a story around it that is arguably the most psychologically sophisticated myth to survive from the ancient world. In Sumer, roughly 4,000 years ago, scribes pressed a narrative into clay tablets that scholars now call the Descent of Inanna. The myth dates to somewhere between 1900 and 3500 BCE, predating Homer by over 1,000 years, making it one of the oldest written narratives in human history. Inanna was the Sumerian queen of heaven and earth, goddess of love, war, fertility, and political power. She was also, explicitly, the planet Venus. The Sumerians did not separate the goddess from the astronomical object. Inanna was Venus. Her story was the planet's story. In the myth, Inanna decides to descend to the underworld, the realm of the dead ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. Before she leaves, she adorns herself in the full regalia of her power. Crown on her head, lapis lazuli beads around her neck, double strand of beads across her chest, breastplate over her heart, gold ring on her wrist, lapis measuring rod and line in her hand, royal robe draped over her body. She dresses as the most commanding being in heaven, which she is. She instructs her servant Ninshibul to seek help from the gods if she does not return within 3 days, and she begins the descent. The underworld has 7 gates. At the first gate, the gatekeeper stops Inanna and demands that she remove her crown before she may pass. Her authority lifts away. At the second gate, the lapis necklace is taken from her throat and her beauty goes with it. Gate after gate, the pattern holds. Each threshold demands another surrender. The beads across her chest, the breastplate over her heart, the gold bracelet on her wrist, each one pulled away, each one carrying a piece of who she believed herself to be. By the 6th gate, the lapis measuring rod and line are taken from her hand, stripping her of judgment, her ability to measure and order the world. At the 7th and final gate, the royal robe is pulled from her body. This is the last layer. Her social identity, the garment that tells the world who she is, the thing she has worn so long it feels like skin. Gone. When Inanna protests this stripping, when she asks why she must surrender everything, the gatekeeper delivers a line that has echoed through 4,000 years of commentary. Quiet, Inanna. The ways of the underworld are perfect. They may not be questioned. She arrives before Ereshkigal, naked, bowed low, stripped of every marker of identity, status, power, and beauty she carried into the descent. The 7 judges of the underworld fix her with the gaze of death. She is killed. Her corpse is hung on a hook on the wall. And there she hangs for 3 days. 3 days later, through the intervention of the god Enki, who sends 2 small beings made from the dirt beneath his fingernails to slip into the underworld unnoticed, Inanna is brought back to life and begins her ascent. But the return is not free. The underworld demands a substitute. A rule of absolute symmetry demands that someone must take her place in the realm of the dead. Inanna agrees, and the demons of the underworld follow her back to the surface to collect the replacement. What happens next is the part of the myth that most spiritual content never reaches, and it may be the most important part. Inanna returns to the world and begins visiting the people in her life. She goes to the cities. She finds her servants, her allies, the people who were supposed to care about her absence. Her faithful servant Ninshubor is the first person she encounters, and Ninshubor is dressed in rags, weeping, mourning Inanna at the gate of the underworld. Ninshubor had done exactly what Inanna asked. She had mourned. She had pleaded with the gods. She had fought for Inanna's return. When the demons of the underworld suggest taking Ninshubor as the substitute, Inanna refuses. Ninshubor earned her survival through genuine devotion. Then Inanna arrives at her own throne, and there sits Dumuzi, her husband. He is not mourning. He is not dressed in rags. He is sitting on a throne, wearing fine garments, enjoying her power, having assumed her position without grief, without effort to rescue her, without apparent concern that she had been dead for 3 days. He filled the vacancy. He enjoyed the upgrade, and he did not look back. Inanna fixes him with the gaze of death, the same gaze the Anunnaki turned on her. Dumuzi becomes the substitute. This is the final lesson of the descent. After you have been stripped of every external marker of value and return knowing what is genuinely yours, you can see clearly who showed up for you and who simply occupied the space you left behind. The descent clarifies not only your own values, but the values of the people around you. Ninshubor valued the relationship. Dumuzi valued the position. The difference was invisible before the descent. It became unmistakable after. For anyone over 60, this distinction carries particular weight. Decades of accumulated relationships, professional alliances, and social circles inevitably contain both Ninshubor's and Dumuzi's retirement, health challenges, the death of a spouse, the downsizing of a home, any significant life transition that removes the markers of status and productivity functions as a descent through the gates, and what emerges on the other side is exactly what Inanna discovered. Some people stay because they value you, others stay because they valued your position, your usefulness, your home, or the version of you that served their needs. The myth does not frame this discovery as betrayal or as cause for bitterness. It frames it as clarity. This is a values audit conducted at the level of identity, and it maps directly onto the astronomical event it was written to describe. Venus, the brightest light in the sky, descends, loses its visibility, vanishes entirely, re-emerges transformed from evening star to morning star. The goddess descends, loses everything she used to define herself, dies, and returns, changed, seeing clearly for the first time who was real and who was performing. The Inanna myth is not an isolated text. The Akkadian version, featuring Ishtar, follows the same structure. The descent pattern, the stripping, the death and return appears in Phoenician, Greek, and Roman mythology. Aphrodite and Persephone echo these themes across different cultures. The pattern recurs because Venus itself recurs, disappearing and reappearing in the sky on a rhythm so regular that every civilization in the Northern Hemisphere eventually built a narrative around it. And in every version, the core teaching holds. The descent is not punishment. It is clarification. You cannot know what you truly value until you have been separated from everything you assumed you valued. And you cannot know who truly values you until your throne is empty and you see who mourned and who moved in. So how did this become do not buy a new outfit during retrograde? The same way Mercury retrograde became a technology hex, through a series of simplifications that each removed one layer of depth until nothing was left but the warning label. Professional astrologers working in the Hellenistic tradition understood Venus retrograde within the context of Venus's full synodic cycle, the complete 584-day journey from morning star to evening star and back again. The retrograde was one phase within that longer arc, not an isolated event. They interpreted it as the descent phase, the period when values and attachments that had been operating on autopilot came up for conscious reassessment. The morning star Venus was associated with bold, outward expression of desire. The evening star Venus was associated with reflective, inward processing of values. The retrograde, when Venus crossed from one phase to the other, was the transition between those two modes. It was a passage, not a problem. Medieval Arabic and Persian astrologers, who preserved and expanded the Greek texts, maintained this complexity. They classified Venus retrograde as a period requiring deliberate attention to matters of value, beauty, and relational harmony, not avoidance of them. The Vedic tradition treated it similarly, as a time of intensified inner inquiry rather than external withdrawal. In all three traditions, the interpretation was embedded in a comprehensive system that required years of study to practice competently. The first flattening happened when astrology moved from professional practice to newspaper columns in the 20th century. The full Venus cycle, with its 8-year pentagram, its morning star and evening star phases, its mythological resonance, could not survive compression into a 3-sentence horoscope. What survived was the simplest possible reduction. Venus equals love and money. Retrograde equals problems. Therefore, Venus retrograde equals love and money problems. A tradition built on one of the oldest initiatory narratives in the written record became a warning to avoid expensive purchases and relationship talks for 6 weeks. Social media completed the reduction. The incentive structure rewarded content that generated anxiety and engagement, not content that required self-examination. A post saying, "Venus retrograde is a values audit that asks what you truly need versus what you habitually want," generates almost no engagement. It is quiet. It is introspective. It does not trigger the urge to share. A post saying, "Venus retrograde starts next week, do not get married, do not change your hair, your ex is coming back," generates thousands of shares. It is dramatic. It is personal. It generates the same fear response that keeps people scrolling. The tradition that began with the goddess descending through 7 gates ended up as a dating column with celestial branding. The Vedic tradition offers a corrective. In Jyotish, the Indian astrological system, Venus is called Shukra, and its retrograde is treated as a period when material pleasures and surface attractions lose their hold. The teaching says that during Venus retrograde, you will naturally find less satisfaction in the things that normally please you, and that the dissatisfaction itself carries useful information. If a relationship feels flat, the flatness is telling you something about the foundation underneath the attraction. If a purchase feels hollow, the hollowness is pointing at a gap between what you actually need and what you habitually want. The tradition treats the discomfort as diagnostic, not as something to medicate or avoid. You are being shown something you could not see while the surface was shining. Subscribe if you want the next one. Now here is where the psychology meets the practice. Because whether or not Venus transmits some kind of values-disrupting energy across 90 million miles of space, the framework the ancients built around its cycle addresses something that modern life handles very poorly. Values rarely get examined on purpose. They get absorbed. You grow up in a family, a culture, an economic class, a generation, and you inherit a set of assumptions about what matters. Money matters, status matters, attractiveness matters, being liked matters. Having the right house, the right partner, the right career, the right body, the right social circle. These assumptions layer onto you through decades of quiet reinforcement until they feel like your own values, like things you deliberately chose. But many of them were never chosen. They were absorbed the way a child absorbs an accent, without ever deciding to speak that way. Venus retrograde in the original tradition was the recurring prompt to examine those inherited values and ask a simple question. Is this actually mine? Do I want this relationship because it genuinely fulfills me? Or because I am afraid of being alone? Do I want this career because the work matters to me? Or because the title impresses people I am trying to impress? Do I spend money on these things because they bring me real pleasure? Or because I absorb the idea that owning them means I am successful? Am I performing a version of my life for an audience that may not even be watching? Or am I living the version that is actually true? These are uncomfortable questions. They are supposed to be. Inanna did not enjoy the 7 gates. She protested at each one. The gatekeeper's answer was not comforting. The stripping is the process. The discomfort is the point. And there is a psychological reason these questions surface more naturally during certain periods than others. Psychologists who study relationship satisfaction have documented what they call the 18-month cycle, a well-observed pattern in which the initial neurochemical high of a new relationship, driven by elevated dopamine and norepinephrine, naturally tapers off at roughly the 12 to 18-month mark. The infatuation chemistry fades, and what remains is either a genuine connection built on shared values and compatible rhythms, or a realization that the attraction was running on fuel that is now burned off. This cycle operates independently of any planetary transit. But it happens to align almost perfectly with the 18-month Venus cycle. Every time Venus retrogrades, a significant percentage of relationships are naturally reaching that inflection point where surface attraction meets deeper compatibility, and one of them blinks. The result is that people do experience relationship turbulence around Venus retrograde, not because the planet is interfering, but because the natural rhythm of human pair bonding produces a periodic reckoning on a similar schedule. Venus retrograde did not cause the reassessment. The reassessment was already in progress. The retrograde gave it a name and a framework, which is exactly what the Sumerians intended it to do. The same principle applies to financial values. Behavioral economists have documented what they call hedonic adaptation, the well-established finding that the pleasure derived from a new purchase, a raise, or an upgrade in lifestyle fades to baseline within roughly 6 to 18 months. The car that thrilled you when you bought it becomes just a car within a year. The house that felt like a dream becomes just the place where the bills arrive and the gutters need cleaning. This adaptation is constant, but it operates below conscious awareness. You do not notice the pleasure fading because it fades gradually, like the sky dimming at dusk. A Venus retrograde framework provides an external prompt to check in and ask whether the things you are spending money on still bring genuine satisfaction, or whether you are maintaining spending patterns that outlive their purpose. That prompt, arriving every 18 months, is exactly frequent enough to catch the hedonic adaptation cycle before it calcifies into permanent, unexamined habit. The practical framework is straightforward, and it does not require any particular belief about planetary influence. When Venus retrograde approaches, do a real values inventory, not a vision board or a gratitude list, but an honest accounting of where your time, energy, money, and attention actually go, and whether those allocations reflect what genuinely matters to you or what you inherited, assumed, or never questioned. Start with your closest relationships, not to evaluate whether they are good or bad, but to notice where you are performing rather than connecting. Where are you maintaining a surface because the surface has always been there? Where have you stopped asking what this relationship actually gives both of you and started running on habit instead? And notice who in your life is Ninshabur, genuinely present, genuinely invested, and who might be Dumuzi, enjoying the position without earning the place. Then, turn to your spending, not to budget, but to notice what you buy out of genuine desire versus what you buy out of reflex, boredom, or the need to signal something to yourself or others. The difference between those two categories is the difference between a value and a habit. One survives the gates, the other does not. Your daily routine deserves the same honest examination. Where do you spend time because you chose to? And where do you spend time because you never stopped to choose? The activities that survive the question, "Would I choose this if I were starting from scratch today?" are the ones built on real foundation. The ones that collapse under that question were borrowed costumes, and Venus retrograde is the prompt to notice them. And finally, the hardest layer. The parts of yourself you perform for others. The version of you that shows up at family gatherings, at work, in public, online. How much of that version is genuine, and how much is a robe you put on so long ago that you forgot it was a costume? Inanna's royal robe was the last thing removed before the final gate. For many people, the social self is the hardest layer to examine because it has been worn the longest and feels the most like skin. None of this requires hiding from life for 41 days or cancelling plans until the transit passes. The ancient traditions never advised withdrawal. They advised attention. Keep living, keep relating, keep spending, keep showing up. But do it while paying attention to what feels hollow, what feels forced, and what feels real. The hollowness is the diagnostic. It is Inanna at the gate, feeling the crown lift off her head, and discovering that she is not her crown. And there is one more layer to this practice that draws directly from the rose of Venus itself. Because Venus returns to approximately the same position every 8 years, you can use the 8-year cycle as a personal reflection tool. Think back 8 years from today. Where were you? What did you value then? What relationships were central to your life? What were you spending your money and time on? Now think back 16 years and run the same inventory. If you are in your 60s, you have lived through at least 7 complete turns of the rose. That is enough data to reveal the real pattern underneath all the surface changes. You will begin to see which values persisted through every cycle because they are genuinely yours, and which ones rose and fell because they belong to a particular season of life, a particular career, a particular relationship, a particular version of yourself that no longer exists. The 8-year look back is structural analysis, not nostalgia. It shows you what your values actually are, measured not by what you say you care about, but by what has survived 2 or 3 or 7 full turns of the rose. The rose of Venus will continue tracing its 5-petaled flower across the sky long after every one of us is gone. It has been drawing the same pattern since before humans existed to watch it. Every 18 months, one petal takes shape as Venus descends and returns. Every 8 years, the flower completes and begins again, in returns. Whether you see that pattern as sacred geometry, orbital mechanics, or both, it is one of the most elegant rhythms in the solar system. And the 4,000-year-old story built around it, the goddess who descended through 7 gates and returned knowing what was truly hers, remains one of the most useful frameworks for self-examination ever produced. You do not need to fear Venus retrograde. You need to use it the way it was always meant to be used. The gates are an invitation, not a sentence. They are asking you to discover what you are truly made of when the crown, the robe, and the title are set aside. Inanna went down naked and came back knowing what was real and what was costume. That is the teaching. It always has been. And it is waiting for you every 18 months, traced in petals across the sky. The next video is about angel numbers. The repeating sequences like 111, 222, and 333 that millions of people believe carry messages from the universe. One person created the entire system in 2005, then publicly renounced everything she had written and asked her publishers to pull the books from print. The numbers kept spreading without her. That video is on screen now.